The older I become, the more I notice something uncomfortable about human nature. The more people know about you, the easier it becomes for them to quietly place you inside a story. And once you are inside that story, escaping it can take years. I learned that lesson the hard way more than once in life. My name is Evelyn, and I am 79 years old now. After a lifetime of watching people, I have learned something that took me decades to understand. There are certain things you should never reveal too easily, because once they are spoken, people begin to see you differently. And once people see you differently, it can be surprisingly difficult to change their minds. When we are young, we believe honesty means saying everything. We believe sharing our thoughts proves we are open, sincere, and trustworthy. But life quietly teaches a different lesson. The world does not always reward openness. Sometimes the world studies it. Sometimes it remembers it, and sometimes it quietly uses it to decide who you are. Over the years, I have come to understand something that took decades to see clearly. Silence is not weakness. Sometimes it is wisdom. There are certain things in life that should not be revealed too easily, not because you want to deceive people, and not because you are hiding something shameful, but because not everyone deserves access to the most sensitive parts of your life. Today I want to share 7 lessons that took me most of my life to understand. 7 things that, once spoken, can quietly change the way people see you. And once people see you differently, it can be very difficult to change their minds. The first thing you should be careful about revealing is your weaknesses. I learned this lesson in a way I did not expect. Many years ago, when I was in my early 40s, I worked in an office that was changing very quickly. New systems appeared every year, new software, new procedures. Everything was becoming digital. Some of my coworkers adapted effortlessly, but I struggled more than most. Computers were never my strength. I could do my job well, but learning new digital tools took me longer than others. One afternoon during lunch, several coworkers were sitting around a small table near the window. Rain tapped softly against the glass, while everyone discussed a new system the company planned to introduce. People sounded excited. Someone joked about how easy it would be to learn. Without thinking too much, I laughed and said something simple. "I've never been very good with computers." Everyone chuckled politely, and the conversation moved on. But over the following months, something subtle began to happen. Whenever a new project involved technology, managers looked at other people first. When training opportunities appeared, others were recommended before me. At first, I thought it was coincidence, so I worked harder. I stayed late after work and practiced the new systems on my own. Slowly, I improved, but something had already changed. In their minds, a quiet label had formed. I had become the woman who struggled with computers. Even when my skills improved, that image remained. And that was when I learned something important. People often remember your weaknesses longer than they notice your growth. Sometimes a single careless sentence can become a permanent label. Not everyone needs to know where you struggle, but weaknesses are not the only things that can quietly reshape the way people treat you. There is something even more fragile: your dreams. When I was younger, I had a dream that excited me more than anything else. I wanted to open a small cafe combined with a bookstore in my neighborhood. Nothing luxurious, just a peaceful place where people could drink coffee, read quietly, and have thoughtful conversations. I imagined warm lights, wooden shelves filled with books, and the quiet sound of pages turning while rain fell outside. For months I worked on the idea in private. Late at night I sat at the kitchen table, sketching possible layouts on pieces of paper. I researched locations. I saved money. I wrote plans in a notebook that I kept beside my bed. The dream felt alive. Eventually, I shared the idea with a few people close to me. I expected encouragement. Instead, I received warnings. One friend told me bookstores were disappearing. Another said cafes fail all the time. A relative asked why I would leave a stable job for something uncertain. At first I ignored their doubts, but their words followed me home. Maybe they were right. Maybe it was too risky. Maybe I wasn't ready. The dream that once excited me began to feel heavier. I delayed the idea. Then I postponed it again. Eventually, life became busy, and the dream quietly disappeared. Years later, something happened that I still remember clearly. Someone else opened a cafe and bookstore on the exact corner I had once considered. Today it is always full of people. Sometimes when I pass that place, I stop for a moment and look through the window. People sit with books and cups of coffee, just as I once imagined. And every time I see it, I feel the same quiet realization. Dreams are incredibly fragile when they are new, and sometimes the fastest way to weaken a dream is to expose it to the doubts of others too early. But dreams are fragile in another way as well. Sometimes the danger is not doubt. Sometimes the danger is money. The third thing you should keep private is your financial situation. I once knew a man named Victor who had worked nearly 40 years as a high school teacher. Victor lived modestly. He saved carefully and avoided unnecessary expenses. By the time he retired, he had built a comfortable financial cushion. One holiday dinner, a relative casually asked him how retirement was going. Victor smiled and answered honestly, "I saved enough to live peacefully." He meant nothing more than that. But within a few weeks, things began to change. A cousin approached him with a business idea. A nephew needed help paying off debt. An old friend suddenly faced an unexpected emergency. Victor had a generous heart, so he helped when he could. But the requests never stopped. And when he finally began saying no, something else happened. The phone calls became less frequent. The visits became shorter. Some people slowly disappeared. One evening, Victor said something that stayed with me. The hardest part wasn't losing money, he told me. The hardest part was realizing how many relationships depended on it. And that was when I understood something uncomfortable about human nature. Money does not always change people. Sometimes it simply reveals them. But there is something people reveal even more easily than money: their pain. There was a woman in my neighborhood named Eleanor. Eleanor had struggled with health problems for many years. Her joints caused constant pain, and she often slept very little at night. Whenever someone asked how she was doing, she answered honestly. She described every ache and every sleepless night. At first, people listened with sympathy. Neighbors would stop and talk with her on the sidewalk. But over time, the conversations became shorter. People who once stopped to chat now waved from across the street. One afternoon, something happened that she could not ignore. Eleanor was walking slowly down the street toward a neighbor she had known for years. Their eyes met. For a brief second, the neighbor hesitated. Then the neighbor suddenly turned toward the mailbox and pretended to read a letter that wasn't there. Later that week, Eleanor asked me a question I will never forget. Why do people avoid me now? Everyone carries invisible burdens. But when someone constantly speaks about pain, people begin to associate that person with heaviness. People move toward warmth and quietly move away from constant suffering. The fifth thing you should protect is your past mistakes. I once knew a woman named Patricia who had rebuilt her life after a very difficult youth. She had made decisions she deeply regretted, but she worked hard to change. For decades, she built a respectable life. She raised a family, earned the trust of her community, and became someone people admired. One day, she confided in someone she believed she could trust. She told the story of her past honestly. At first, the listener seemed compassionate. But stories travel in ways we rarely expect. Within weeks, whispers began appearing in places Patricia had never even visited. Suddenly, people who had respected her for years began to look at her differently. Not because of who she was, but because of who she had once been. Even when you outgrow your past, not everyone is willing to update the story they believe about you. The sixth thing you should never reveal is someone else's secret. A man I once knew named Thomas lost a friendship that had lasted more than 20 years. One evening, his closest friend shared something deeply personal with him. Thomas promised it would remain between them. Later that night, he mentioned it casually to his wife. He believed it would stay inside the walls of their home. But secrets have a strange way of traveling. A few weeks later, the secret returned to the person who had trusted him. But it returned through someone else's voice. His friend never argued. He never raised his voice. He simply stopped answering the phone. 20 years of friendship ended in silence. A secret does not disappear when you share it. It simply changes owners. Finally, there is one lesson I learned the hard way. A mistake I made in my own marriage. When my husband and I were younger, life was not always easy. Money was tight. Work was exhausting. Small disagreements sometimes became larger arguments. During those years, whenever I felt frustrated, I spoke about those problems with friends. At the time, it felt harmless. They listened. They offered advice. But something happened that I did not expect. Years later, my husband and I solved those problems. Our relationship became stronger than it had ever been. But my friends still remembered the stories I had told. When he entered a room, I sometimes noticed subtle looks, quiet judgments. They had built an image of him based on the worst moments I had described. Problems inside a marriage can be solved, but the opinions outsiders build about your family rarely change. It took me most of my life to understand something simple. And sometimes I wish I had learned it 40 years earlier. I have watched people lose opportunities, friendships, and peace simply because they said too much to the wrong people. Wisdom is not only knowing what to say, it is knowing what should remain unspoken. Guard your weaknesses. Protect your dreams. Keep your finances private. Share your pain wisely. Leave your past where it belongs. Respect the secrets of others. And protect the dignity of your family. Words can build trust, but they can also build cages. And once people place you inside a story, escaping it can take years.